Very good morning to all of you. We are starting the webinar right now. Um my name is Umesh Dhargalkar, and I'm going to take you today through the concept of structural audit. Two parts to that. All about structural audit has to be seen from the viewer's point of view and the statutory provisions. Welcome to this webinar on a Sunday morning. This is the third webinar in our Insight series, where we conduct one webinar every month on the subjects which are relevant to general public, with a view to spread the awareness about the technical matters which directly or indirectly impact them. So today's theme is a very specific theme. So this webinar will be very specifically about the concept of structural audit, which actually deals with the strength and stability of old or existing buildings, wherein people like you and I will live or we have our offices there. So we'll be covering two aspects. One, the concept of structural audit, which means what is structural audit, why is it required, by whom it is to be conducted, then what is, how often it is to be done, when it is to be done first, then with what frequency it needs to be done, and then finally how the reports are to be interpreted and how your building will be classified into different categories for further action or further information by the municipal corporation. So actually what I've seen that this concept of structural audits is, I would say, a grossly misunderstood concept, especially what it entails and the statutory provisions. In fact, many of the senior structural engineers also, I have seen that they are definitely aware of what structural audit is because they do it. This is actually a technical subject. But when it comes to about the statutory provisions, in fact, I have seen that even they do not seem to be aware of a few things about a structural audit or the provisions of structural audit, which creates a kind of mystery around these subjects for absolutely no reason. In fact, this is something which can be very easily understood, and that's what we are going to do in today's webinar. And in that sense, I could have turned the topic of today's webinar as something like, demystifying structural audit. So, uh, you see, there are two, three observations which I have made in my practice as a professional or consulting engineer. One thing I have seen is that there are two kinds of people, two extremes. The one type is, that when they see even a small crack in their flat, they are immediately alarmed. They think that there's something grossly wrong with their building, and they start having nightmares about the stability of the building. Then there is another extreme. The other extreme is this, that the buildings, there are several cracks in the building. I have seen a building wherein, in a column, there were uh, there were cockroaches in the crevices of the column. Okay, you can imagine the column as a structural member, and there are big cracks and there are cockroaches there. But the person there, the person who was occupying the flat, and many other people like him in the other flats in the same building, they were, they had mastered the art of living with that kind of situation. So there are two extremes. So this is one kind of, structural assessment of your building, which can tell you objectively from a professional structural engineer about how alarmed you should be about your building. That's number one, one point which I wanted to share with you today. Secondly, in Mumbai, a lot of buildings are going for redevelopment. So there are some buildings which are, I would say, tenanted building, wherein there's an owner and then there are some tenants staying in the same building. Now, typically it is seen that these tenants pay much less rent to the owner, right? And therefore, the owner is not able to do two things. One is that the owner is not able to maintain the building properly with that kind of money which is paid as a rent to him. And secondly, he has dreams about redeveloping that building, and he's the owner. So he wants to redevelop the building and get the profit out of it. Now, at the same time, the tenants, they take the other view. They look at that as an alarming situation, And then such a building, when the structural audit is carried out by the owner, who is the owner of the building, right? And the building is classified as C1, which is the worst kind of building. Naturally, the other people, the tenants, they are alarmed. They say they think no, this must be a kind of a ploy by the owner to evict us and to get profit of this redevelopment project. So they quickly disagree with that report, and then they approach some other consulting engineer and produce another report. Now there are two conflicting reports. Okay, and then what needs to be done in such cases? So this is also something which we'll be covering in this webinar. Now, before I actually start sharing my screen with you, let me give you a little bit of history about structural audit, which many of the people, many of you, or even many consulting engineers may not be knowing. This concept of structural audit actually came way back in 2002. That time it came as a model bylaw which was to be incorporated in a cooperative society's bylaws. You know that cooperative societies are governed by what is called as their internal set of bylaws. Now this was suggested in the model bylaws as one bylaw which would entail the requirement of getting the buildings examined at a specified frequency. This happened in 2002. But remember, it actually came only for the cooperative housing societies. So that was the first time when people started talking about structural audit, and I was part of a team wherein we had conducted a seminar that time, not webinars in 2012, 2002 at VJTI, wherein we had trained 160 consulting engineers to do structural audit, because that was the first time the concept came. All right. Then that was the training for consulting engineers like me. Then second significant step here, a second significant part that happened here was in February 2009, wherein the Maharashtra Act 2009, the Maharashtra Municipal Corporation Act 2009 suffered an amendment. So this, now remember this, now this, earlier it was a provision in the cooperative housing society. It was a very small thing. In 2009, it suddenly became big, and it became applicable to the entire state of Maharashtra in form of an amendment which was applied to the Maharashtra Municipal Corporations Act. Okay, and this was very significant because then the structural audit, the way we knew it, became applicable to the entire state of Maharashtra, regardless of whether it's a private building, it's a municipal building, it's a government building, it's a cooperative housing society, or anything. So this became uniformly became applicable to all the buildings in the state of Maharashtra. Now, based on that amendment, many municipal corporations, all right, many municipal corporations in the state of Maharashtra, they formulated their own internal rules, and for that purpose, there was a change in the MMC Act 2011. So, like many municipal corporations, I am actually connected with mostly with the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. So, I can say that in 2011, this revision in the Maharashtra Act brought in a significant and a very particular revision in form of what is today known as Section 353B, which was incorporated in the MNC Act. MNC Act is Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act, and this came in 2011. So this was the third event, okay, and then it became applicable, and then the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, MCGM, they brought out their own internal set of rules about how to implement 353B in the city of Mumbai, okay, or wherever MMC Act was applicable. Then the question came about, conflicting reports coming and all. Then there was a court matter, and in 2018 May, that was May 2018, MCGM, that is Mumbai Municipal Corporation, again brought out a series of guidelines for classification of buildings, how the report should be. They gave a form called, which is called pro forma B, and they laid out guidelines about how structural audit should be done, how it would be interpreted, how the building would be classified, and how the further actions would be taken in terms of, say, in respect of buildings which are classified as C1. Now, friends, these are these are the things which you are going to see in today's webinar. So this you can think of as just a preamble. And let me now start the main course by sharing my screen. So we are on the theme of understanding structural audit and its statutory provisions. Let me check whether I'm able to share my screen properly with you. I think you are able to see my screen and hear me as well. So just in case there is any doubt or any something, please put a message in the chat box so that my assistants here will be able to see that and report to me. So here we go with our theme today, which is understanding structural audit and its statutory provisions, which is a public webinar by Technosis. Now about this webinar, as I said, this is the third public webinar in the Insight series by Technosis. That's our company. What I'll be doing is that I'll be giving a talk, my presentation, which is about 45 to 60 minutes, followed by we'll be having question answers. So how do you tell me about your questions? How do you put forth your questions? What you need to do is that when I'm talking, same time, all right, or even later, whenever you feel like, when you have a question pops up in your mind, you type it out in the chat box. But don't forget to put your name and mobile number there so that I know who's asking that question. And in the middle of my presentation, if there are any sound or video issues, please be quick to report them again on the chat box. And simultaneously, when the problem goes away, do not forget to confirm that the problem has gone away so that I do not end up solving a problem which is not there. It will be in your own benefit to get a best kind of reception, to sit close to your Wi-Fi. If you are on a Sunday morning, I believe you must be sitting at your home and there must be family members around. So perhaps it would be a wise thing to ask your family members, your brothers, sisters, sons, whoever, to request them to get off the Wi-Fi connection so that you get the whole of it. And we have a technical help group. There are almost 100 members there already. So the link for the technical tech help group, for the society tech help group, this is for general public. There's a link which is there in the chat box. Find it out and then use it later, or you copy it right now and share your name, mobile and email for a direct intimation for future webinars. And then there is a group, as I said, So this link will be shared with you even in the last slide. So this is how we now start with our webinar. Now, first and foremost question, why do we need to do structural audit? Now, if I have to give my answer to you in form of a picture, you are actually right now looking at it. You can see the building right there in this slide itself. And you can see how, you can make your own, I would say, impression about this building. But believe me, there are people and there are families who are staying in this building. They are staying here. In fact, some families have blossomed in this building. There are many people who are staying in this building. And the condition of this building is like this. Okay. See, the question is, why do structural audit? Well, a very simple answer to that would be so that for a building like this, we are in a position to understand what if there is a risk involved for the life and property of the people who are staying in this building. Very simply put like that. Now, when we want to approach the question in a different and systematic manner, I would put it this way. Let us understand an existing building, a building which is say maybe 40-year-old, your own building. Okay. So, let me switch off my mobile. So when you see a building there, obviously what has happened, that building was born at a particular time. What I mean by that is that it was constructed at a particular time. Now, how does the building come up? What are the stages or what are the life phases of a building? First life phase, which we can call as inception or conception, is the planning part, wherein the building has been planned in form of architectural plans with number of floors, flats, and everything, which is done on piece of paper. That's a drawing. That's an architectural drawing. Now the same building, when it has to actually stand, it has to support various loads. Then it has to have a certain foundation. It has to be constructed with a certain grade of concrete, certain grade of reinforcement, which we call as salia. Okay, certain materials are to be used for wall, flooring, and all those things. Then the building also has to withstand the forces of earthquake whenever an earthquake strikes. So all that forms the engineering part of that. So planning is followed by engineering. But planning as well as engineering both are still on the paper. So planning says this is how the building needs to look, this is how it should be, from the user's point of view. Whereas from the engineering point of view, we say this is how the building is to be constructed, not yet constructed. But these are two things, planning and engineering go together, and then they decide how the building is to be constructed. And then the building goes to construction, and the construction happens, and the building is ready for occupation. When the building is ready, when the occupancy certificate is received, then people like you and me, we buy a flat in that. And then we go to stay there, and then we are part of a society, the housing society, and then we suddenly realize, hey, this is the building which I really need to maintain throughout my life or the building's life, whichever is earlier. So, if I want to look at these life phases of the building, you need to see this very clearly here. That planning and engineering, you can say maybe takes about a year, 1 year. Construction, let me presume it takes 3 years. So 3 plus 1. So planning, engineering, and construction for the building to actually come and manifest on the site and to be ready for occupation is just a matter of 4 years. Whereas later on, when the building is given to you, it's supposed to serve you for a life of 40 to 60 years. So that is 10 times 4 or 15 times 4. So if the planning, engineering, and construction of a building is 4 years, its actual life thereafter is going to be 10 to 15 times that period. And this is something which is crucial, and this is very important to understand. Now, what happens in those 40 to 60 years? The building, naturally, like any product, it suffers deterioration, and it starts losing its value as a habitable structure, right? So the building to begin with is good, then slowly something starts happening with it. You in the common terms, if I have to say, the cracks in concrete, the seepage, or whatever you say, and slowly the strength, stability, everything of the building, and the quality of the building, the quality, useful life of the building, the usefulness of the building starts going down. And this happens during the maintenance period, where there is no architect involved, there is no engineer involved. And that building is given to you all by yourself to maintain for that many years. So after taking occupation, it is the owner's responsibility to maintain it in a safe and habitable condition. Why? Because he's staying there, his family is staying there, his children are growing up there, and not just that, but because it's a precious asset, especially for someone who's staying in cities. It's a precious asset. It's a very valuable asset. So naturally, maintaining the building in a proper manner is something which we would say that yes, उसमें कौन सी बड़ी बात है, वो तो सबको तो करना है. But the trouble is that this doesn't happen the way it should happen. So people, confine themselves with the flat which they are staying in and think of that as their own bungalow, with complete disregard to the other flats which are in the same building, and with complete disregard to the building as a structure on which, say, maybe if I am staying on fourth floor, you know, I am on the fourth floor because there are three more floors below. People start, when it comes to spending money for maintenance and everything, somehow this starts taking a backseat, and that's why buildings start deteriorating even faster, especially those buildings which are owned by cooperative housing society. But then, as a owner means as an individual owner or as a cooperative housing society, one must ensure that yes, we understand that the building is definitely going to deteriorate like any product, but then we must ensure that the structural deterioration does not reach the critical stage and lead to loss of stability, which is very, very important. Loss of stability of the building, thereby causing risk to life and property for the people who are staying in the building. So this is actually the reason why we need to do structural audit. Now, when we say buildings deteriorate, let's understand what could be the reasons, what could be the causes of deterioration of the building. First and foremost, natural aging of a building, like any product, like your car, like your motorcycle, like your computer, like anything in this world, like you yourself, we age progressively. But that normal aging, if it is accelerated by bad construction, if the building was not constructed right in the first place, then this aging also gets accelerated. And then it won't be a long time until you actually realize that you need to spend a lot of money to repair or rehabilitate the building. So this is one of the first causes. The second cause is, the external and internal seepage into the building, which is very, very common. It's a topic of anybody's discussion anywhere. So when I say external seepage, I'm talking about the rainwater seepage through the walls, through the terrace slab or wherever. And internal seepage meaning seepage from the flat above to the flat below. Now these are the two seepages which again impact the structural quality of a building adversely. Then the third factors are environmental, such as a saline weather. Like say, for example, we are staying on the west coast, like say Mumbai is a city is a coastal city, and with the coast, when we are in the coastal cities, naturally the chlorides in the weather, okay, they definitely affect your building, and then they accelerate the degradation of the building. Similarly, about pollution, perhaps you might not be knowing that vehicular pollution also impacts the strength of the building in an adverse manner, because those carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide emissions, they can cause carbonation of the concrete, and when carbonation happens, the concrete becomes brittle and loses strength. So that also happens. Plus, there can be the effect of subsoil chemicals. For example, if you are staying close to an industrial area, like say industrial belt in, like say Chalpok or wherever, in Mumbai city, then it's possible that there are some industrial chemicals in that plant. I'm just giving an example, wherein, and when those percolate down below, they start affecting the foundation. Well, a very common example of subsoil chemical, I will not say subsoil chemicals, but something similar to that could be like, we have bore wells, and we proudly say कि हम इसका पानी पीते नहीं, हम तो खाली flushing के लिए use करते हैं. Fair enough, you don't consume the water, I agree with you. But sometimes, or quite often, I have seen that those pipes, which many times are concealed, and which carry that water, that borewell water into your flat. Suppose that water is acidic, it has chlorides. Then it starts eating that metal which is carrying that, which is iron. Okay. And what happens is that if these pipes are concealed in the walls, that problem becomes even bigger. So I've seen it in so many societies where the pipes carrying potable water or drinkable water, they are fine, but the pipes which are carrying water to the toilets for flushing, they are actually suffered huge erosion. So these are some examples of the environmental type of causes. Then biggest part, especially what we see in urban area like Mumbai, is the misuse. Everyone thinking his flat as something like his own, a bungalow, with complete disregard, as I said, to the rest of the building. And then um, undertaking alterations in his own flat. This is one of the big menace points in the city of Mumbai. Alterations meaning making change all by yourself in your flat structure. It could be removing a few walls or constructing new walls. You know, if it's a small flat, then uh, making shifting wet areas into dry areas, such as uh, using the balcony as a kitchen and using the kitchen as a bedroom. I understand that the flats are small, but these are the points which actually these alterations actually is one of the biggest problems or the biggest causes of structural deterioration. Then there can be overloading. You have sometimes a balcony is converted into I would say bedroom. Then there are heavy cupboards there. The cantilever, there are cantilever balconies with heavy cupboards supported on that. So this is what I mean by alterations, overloading. Some residential buildings are being used by godowns. You may not be knowing, but I am aware of a couple of such buildings. Our residential building is being used as a school. Then use of harmful chemicals. This is a classic example of use of harmful chemicals. If you see an industrial building, an RCC building, but wherein there are small industrial galas there. Sometimes you come across some galas such as of a business of say something like imitation jewelry, and when you see that in that business what happens is that they use lots of acids, so there are acid fumes, and you can actually see the RCC work which is there, all the beams and columns getting affected because of this. So these are the kinds of misuse. Actually, uh, in my case, when I actually had a look at that imitation jewelry kind of a business, that building was not designed for that kind of business. So it was, I would say, that was also. So this is misuse is one of the biggest problems or biggest causes in urban setting because of due to which your buildings deteriorate faster. Then the disasters, of course, they are not very common, okay, but then there can be a fire, and when the fire happens, it can affect your concrete, it can affect the strength of the concrete. Then there can be earthquake. These are obviously not day-to-day effects, but then when a fire or when any disaster happens or a blast, say 1993 blast, there were some buildings which are impacted because of that, or a nearby excavation. Like say your building is standing, your old building is standing, and someone wants to put up a tower, a very tall tower next to that with some basements, and he is excavating. I think you can immediately recall an example of a building in Vadala, which was in newspapers a few months back. So these are the disasters. Now let me tell you. You see, after a little while, I am going to tell you about when structural audit is to be done, after how and when it is to be done first time, and then after that with how much of frequency it has to be done. But let me tell you right now itself that when you have a disaster, forget all those when, those stipulations about when the structural audit is to be done. Everything. If your building has suffered disaster like fire, earthquake, or blast or something like that, then that is the time when you need to do perhaps an additional structural audit, because such disasters can be really bad for your building. Then poor maintenance and prolonged neglect of deterioration. So it's understood that the building is going to deteriorate, and what is required, like our car, when a car doesn't work, the problem with this is that when a car doesn't work, we definitely take it to a mechanic. But there's no such thing as a building doesn't work. Building works. building works. But then there is a pain in the building. Building is not happy. But the building works, and somehow then we tend to feel इसको चलता है तो फिर चलो. But इसको चलता है मतलब this is my building. This is where I stay. So if I neglect the maintenance part and neglect the deterioration and do not maintain it properly, naturally my building is also going to suffer and perhaps come to be classified as C1 a few years from now. C1 means a very dangerous building. So, with all these deteriorations, very simply, if you are having a building and you expect that building to serve you for 40 to 60 years, naturally you need to take care of it from time to time. And how will you take care of it? By repairing, by maintaining. How will you know how it is to be repaired? By understanding what is required for the building in form of a repair. How will you understand what is required for the building? Through a survey which we are going to talk about, and that's what is structural audit, which is a periodic assessment which is required for maintenance repair, which is the key to enhance the useful life of your building. Your building, when your family is staying, your home or your office, whatever, which is actually giving you all this service, you need to maintain it. First of all, assess it regularly and then maintain it. So if I have to understand the purpose of structural audit, it is to ensure the periodic condition survey of an existing building so that the owners like you, I would say the housing society or the pure owner or the of a tenanted building, the owner of the building, the owners or occupiers as well, because occupiers are also staying there, become aware of the structural condition of that building. They should be first aware, and then they can take timely action to repair or strengthen it to enhance its useful life. This is the purpose of this. Is, if you ask me a proper answer to the question why structural audit, this is it. And when we do this periodic condition survey, what is our focus? We got three focuses or four. Number one, is there a risk to me, to my life? To our life or to our property. Number one. Does the building need any repair work or rehabilitation work? Okay. If it needs, how urgent they are? What needs to be done urgently? And what can I do to enhance the useful life of my building? With this purpose, a periodic condition survey is done, and that is what is called as structural audit. So, structural audit is a periodic condition survey by a structural engineer. It's not something to be done by a secretary or chairman of a society. Okay. Then it is to be conducted as per statutory provisions or by own choice. Statutory provisions means what? There are government guidelines. So you follow them. And if it says the first structural audit is to be done at the end of 30 years, you need to do that. That's a mandatory requirement. You need to do that. You can't escape that. But that doesn't limit you. You are free to do a structural audit even at 10 years. You don't need to wait for 30 years if you are concerned about your building. You can do it anytime you want. So, by your own choice. Okay, for example, I have seen some buildings, especially in New Bombay, many years back, which were in need of structural audit within 7 years of their construction because of their inherent bad structural quality. So if your structural quality is bad, the way it was given to you, the building, then what is required is that you need not wait for, I would say you should not wait for those 30 years. What you need to do is that you need to understand, and the building talks to you. Building definitely shows to you. The seepage coming, the cracks and everything is something which I would say laymen or public, just ordinary people, they do understand. And then the only conscious decision that is required is to take it to structural audit. Now, what does structural audit consist of? It consists of a thorough visual survey of the entire building as a structure. The entire building as a structure. So, there is no such thing as structural audit of flat number 302 in a building. Flat number 302 is not a structure. Flat number 302 is a flat in a building structure. So structural audit, sometimes I get calls, my flat needs to be structurally audited. So I have to explain to that person. You can do any survey for repair everything. but you cannot call it a structural audit. The structural audit is for the building structure. And what surveys are involved here? In fact, there are three factors here. Number one is what we call as external survey. The building is to be surveyed thoroughly. From the entire building is to be surveyed by by a qualified, experienced structural engineer. And in the external survey, what is covered is mostly the common areas, like say external walls, terrace, stills, lobby, lifts, you know, common areas, water tanks, everything that is commonly used and commonly owned area. Okay, so that's what is called as what we call as external survey. Then there are internal surveys. Internal survey meaning the surveys of each flat or each office, if it's an office building or a shop or whatever it is, there in there. Each unit. Okay, so that's we call as internal survey. So that tells us about how that person has maintained the flat, and then the external survey tells us about the common parts of the building. Now that is not enough. This is something which the structural audit agency is definitely going to see with their visual eyes. They are going to see that. But there are certain things which they will not be able to see. For example, just imagine if a building does a structural audit today in the month of December, a very, very pleasant month, the rains are gone, there is no seepage to be seen. Now, if you order a structural audit, I am not saying you should not do structural audit in the month of December. I am saying that you need to do it, But then you need to tell those people who are coming to survey your building about those things which they are not able to see today, and that's going to be your client feedback. For example, you need to tell them, okay, last time it rained, then there was seepage here, so that problem, even if they are not able to understand or see it, they are able to understand it from the way you report. Or in fact, you can say like that, the last time the earthquake happened, my building shook like this. This is a very valuable feedback that has to come from the occupants. Similarly, there has to be repair history. When was the last time you repaired the building? What were those points which were covered in that repair? All this has to be shared with the structural audit people as your feedback. It's something like this. Slowly in the last point in this slide, I'm going to tell you that structural audit is something like a physical survey, or you say, what you do when you visit your doctor. Suppose you are a 40-year-old now. Your age is 40. Suppose I'm talking about a person. Then perhaps you will take a decision that henceforth I am going to visit my family physician once in 5 years, or do all those examinations and everything, tests and everything, and find out if there is anything wrong with my health. So I will do it from 40. I'll do it at 45. Then I'll do it at 50. Then I will decide, no, when I'm 50, I'll do it every 3 years. So 53, 50, like that. Then I may decide that when I'm 60, I'll do it every year. That's for me to decide. So like that. But when I go to my physician or to my doctor, then obviously he's going to examine me and everything. But there are certain feedbacks about myself which I have to tell him all by myself. Otherwise, he is not going to know about it. For example, if in the morning, if I feel giddy, okay, every single morning, and if I visit my doctor in the evening, obviously the effect of that giddiness is not something which the doctor is going to see. It's my responsibility to tell him so that he is in a position to assess my health properly. So same thing goes with the structural audit. Your feedback is also very, very important. Now, as I said, such a survey is focused mainly on loss of stability, risk to human life, and elongating the useful life. And the further action after doing structural audit, when the report comes, what is to be done thereafter? That will depend on the auditor's recommendations which are laid out in this report. Okay. So as I said, this is something like, the regular health checkup of people at whatever 40, 50. And that is all by themselves. There are no statutory provisions for that to the best of my knowledge. But we do it because we are concerned about our health. And same goes for the building. We should do this structural audit because we should be concerned about our building. Now let's see the statutory provisions. Now, before actually talking, because this is going to take a long time, before talking about the statutory provisions, let me first tell you that there are two provisions here, two different provisions. They are not necessarily conflicting, but there are two different provisions. Number one provision is, as I said, which has come on account of the change in the, or say, amendment to the uh, municipal acts, Maharashtra Municipal um Corporations Act, and then in Mumbai it came to as Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act, MMC Act, and then it came in form of 353B. This is, as I said, this is something which is, remember, this is applicable to the entire state of Maharashtra, regardless of whether it's a private building or a public building or a building owned by government, any building, any structure, fire stations, anything. All structures, all buildings, they come under this purview. So this is a statutory provision which is applicable to all the buildings, and it came in 2009, became applicable in Mumbai in 2011. Okay, and that's what it is. So for the entire state of Maharashtra. Now parallelly, there is another structural audit statutory, I will not say statutory provision, but another provision which can be found in the bylaws, model bylaws of the cooperative housing society. For those of you, uh, every person who is taking the cooperative housing society should know that model bylaws are the bylaws by which you decide to govern yourself. So they are the sort of set of rules and regulations which by which you are bound. You means that particular society members are bound. So this is not all universal for the state of Maharashtra. So in your model bylaws, if you have adopted the model bylaws, perhaps there is a bylaw number 77 which talks about structural audit. So this is a different provision. Okay. Now this provision is applicable to that society. Which society? That society which has adopted the bylaw. It is not applicable to the rest of Maharashtra. So I will say, I will sort of conclude this preamble by saying that the Act, the Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act, is applicable to all the buildings, all the structures, including cooperative housing societies, all. Whereas this 77 number bylaw is applicable to that cooperative society in addition to that MMC Act. So with that, let's get into this. Now, first of all, how these provisions came for the state of Maharashtra. They came by way of the amendments to Maharashtra Municipal Corporations and Municipal Councils Act 2008, which suffered fifth amendment on 7th Feb 2009. You don't need to do all this thing. I'm just giving you a background. Now, what does it say, this provision? It came in 2009. But remember that cooperative societies bylaw, that thing came in 2002 and this came in 2009. Okay. So what do the statutory provisions say? They say that this provision is mandatory. There's no option. Okay. So regardless of any situation, making structural, I mean, they have made the structural audit provision mandatory. Mandatory means compulsory. Everyone has to do that. And they have also said the purpose is to check the fitness of the building for human habitation. Remember, all this is being done to protect the human life, to protect the life of you and your family, my family, like that. And it's very important to note here, especially for those technical people who are a part of this webinar. I know that there are some consulting engineers also who have joined. I would like to bring it to their attention that in this whole amendment or in this whole act, nobody calls it structural audit. They call it examination by structural engineer. Structural audit is a word or is a term which came for some other reason and that's being used. But then it is actually the examination by a structural engineer, and it came in force with immediate effect. 7/2/2009, it became mandatory from that day. So this is the broad provision from which all other provisions come. Now what are the all other ways? So this is for the state of Maharashtra. Then in Maharashtra, there are 4 different acts. There are 4 different acts. There are 4 different municipal acts. The first, I would say, the closest to me, or the act which is relevant to me is Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act 1888, which is also called Bombay Act number 3. Here you will find that section 353 has been inserted because of that earlier broad act. Now this is for all those areas where MMC Act, Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act is applicable, especially City of Mumbai. Okay. Now there are 3 other acts. I will only show them in this thing. I am not going to talk about them. See, they are like, Bombay Provincial Municipal Corporations Act, City of Nagpur Corporation Act, and Maharashtra Municipal Councils, Nagar Panchayats and Industrial Township Acts. There are 3 more. And just like there is a section 353B in Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act, similar section can be found in all these acts, although the number may be different. So in a sense, what we'll be discussing about section 353B today is applicable to all other acts as well. Only thing, people who are staying in Nagpur will perhaps need to look at the City of Nagpur Corporation Act and find out which is that number there which is applicable to their building. In principle, this is all the same. Now let's see what section 353B means. The question, when is structural audit to be done? This is answered here. The first structural audit is to be done. This is what the act says, not the bylaw of the society, about which I'll talk a little later. I am right now only discussing the acts which are applicable to the entire state of Maharashtra. The first structural audit is to be done when the building becomes 30 years of age. 30. Now 30 years from which date? There are 4 stipulations here. 30 years from the first date of assessment, municipal assessment, or from the issue of completion or occupation certificate, or physical occupation of at least 50% of built-up area. Even if there is no occupation certificate, but the building is occupied at least 50% from whatever date, then that is the date, or date of water connection. So these are 4 dates. Now whichever is the earlier of these 4 dates, from that date, you have to do structural audit when the building becomes 30 years of age. Now remember here, this is in the normal course. This is a mandatory provision. But then, mandatory means what? This is something the owner of the building has to do all by himself. There will be nobody, there is no corporation will not be sending you any notice for this. This is your own responsibility. You need to do that. But then if your building is not in good shape, even before 30 years, then you need to use structural audit even earlier if the building is found to be dilapidated by MCGM, that is Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, or the respective corporation wherever that building is located. Second point, what is required in 353B, very important, is the certificate of fitness from human habitation, which has to come from the structural auditor. And that certificate is to be submitted to MCGM within 1 year if you have done it voluntarily. That is as per the mandatory provision. Okay. So within 30 years, after 30 years, you need to do this structural audit. And by the end of 31st year, you need to submit that report to MCGM. And then thereafter, it is to be done every 10 years. That is 30, 40, 50, 60, like that. Every 10 years thereafter, or again earlier if the building is found to be dilapidated by MCGM. So this is what section 353 says about the main point about structural audit, when it is to be done and what is expected from that. Now let us see the roles and responsibilities of various people here. The structural engineer's responsibility, who will be doing the structural audit here. First of all, you need to appoint someone who is registered with the local corporation, or in case of Mumbai Municipal Corporation, as a structure engineer. So who can do structural audit? A structural engineer who is registered as structural engineer with MCGM. Okay, and or a reputed engineering institute like IIT Vijaytia Sardar Patel College in the context of Mumbai. One of the two. So you can hire anyone from the registered people. Now, people seem to be believing, I have come across so many people who feel that the structure engineer should be from on the panel of MCGM. There is no such panel. There is no panel of structural engineers for structural audit. It's only all those people who are registered with as structural engineer with MCGM automatically qualified to be the structural auditor. There is no separate panel. Okay. And as I said, the certificate is to be given. And the recommendation also he has to give for corrective repairs to secure fitness for human habitation. If the auditor feels that there are certain points in the building because of which the building doesn't seem to be fit for human habitation, then he has to also suggest what are the corrective measures for corrective repairs to be undertaken by the owner to make it fit for human habitation. What are the responsibilities of the owner of the building? He is fully responsible for commissioning structural audit as per the provisions. Okay, and undertaking recommended corrective works. It is not allowed that the structural auditor has given some corrective measures and then you sit on it and you don't do it. That is also something which is mandated. Now, for those people who don't do it, because there are so many mandatory things which we say, okay, it's mandatory. Many people in fact feel they have some understanding about I would say misunderstanding about the word mandatory. Many of them feel mandatory is optional. They feel mandatory is not compulsory. It's not so. Mandatory means internally binding. Compulsory means externally binding. So it is something which has to be done. Okay. Now, if you don't do it, what happens? Then the commissioner can step in and he can direct the owner or occupier to cause first structural audit earlier or at 30 years and to submit the certificate within a period not exceeding 30 days. Remember, if you do it by yourself at 30 years, then you got a 1 year to submit that report. Whereas if you get a notice from the corporation, you got 30 days to submit the report. Okay. So if you do it as a mandatory provision, 1 year. If you do it as by way of compliance to the notice, it is 30 days. Now look what commissioner can also do. Commissioner can also direct the owner to cause subsequent structural audits earlier than 10 years. Not necessarily 30, 40, 50, no. If the commissioner feels that the building doesn't seem to be in sound condition, then he can say, no, you do it now. Again, another notice coming, you are given a period of 30 days. And if a certificate is not submitted as per the provision after serving the notice, then there is a fine of almost about rupees 25,000 or amount of property tax for a year, whichever is later. So this is the provision. Then commissioner also has more powers. Then the fine if corrective repairs are not carried out within 6 months. So there are two fines. For not carrying out structural audit, there is one fine, and not carrying out the repairs which have been recommended by the structural consultant or the structural auditor, there is fine for that also. Now, if owner fails, look at the bullet number 2. If owner fails, commissioner may carry out the repairs and recover expenses incurred as arrears of property tax. I mean, these are his powers. I don't know whether really commissioner does this, but this has been well within his powers, that he can carry out the same in the repairs and recover the expenses as arrears of your property tax. So, suppose the estimate of your report was say 50 lakhs and you don't do it, and then the commissioner has to get someone and then the bill becomes 60 lakhs. Then you have to pay 60 lakhs because you did not spend 50 lakhs at the right time, right point of time. Then if you dispute that, if you say नहीं तो मेरा तो 50 lakhs था आपका 60 कैसे हो गया, then yes, you have a right to appeal to the chief judge of a small causes court, but the appeal will be decided in favor of if okay. But then I not put here one point here. Yeah, you have to okay. One point I have not put it, but let me tell you that you can go for appeal, but then you have to put in that money separately in with the court, and then you can go for appeal. And if the appeal is decided in your favor, like the owner's favor, the commissioner will adjust the excess deposited amount with 6.25 interest towards subsequent payments of property. So you don't get your money back. That's what the provisions say. So it becomes very complicated, So that's why it's best to do. In fact, I don't understand why people should not do structural audit or even should not do repair if it's their own building which are going to they are dealing with. It's their own home. So I really don't understand this kind of psychology about delaying or evading structural audit or repair. But people are after all. Now coming to the other. Now I have finished talking about the Act and its provisions. Now let me talk about the model bylaws which are applicable to cooperative housing society. If these bylaws have been adopted by your society, most people don't even know which. I have when some people approach me, I ask them, is this clause there in your model bylaws? They are not even aware of it. So the number is, I think the number can be different. It can be number 77 or number 75, but it talks about structural audit. If there is such a bylaw in your model bylaw in your rule book, in your bylaws, then the provisions are like this. And I call them very sensible provisions as compared with the Act, because the Act says you do the first structural audit 30 years, whereas in Mumbai we have seen a lot of buildings coming to repair for 15 years, 20 years. So in my opinion, structural audit is something which should be done earlier, and the model bylaws, they say is that if your building is between 15 to so, in case of model bylaws, you do the first structural audit at 15 years. Then the subsequent structural audits at once in 5 years thereafter. So 15, 20, 25, 30. Now when the building becomes 30 years old, you do it every 3 years. 33, 36, 39, like that. Now when you have got these bylaws, remember, who are you answerable to if you don't do this? This is nothing to do with the commissioner. This is, you are answerable with your own members. So in this sense, this is a different kind of provision as compared with the provisions of the. Now let's see what a structural audit report looks like in terms of the contents. Building description as a structure. What kind of building it is, number of floors, number of flats, whether it is an RCC frame structure, where is the water, in what manner is the water tank supported, is there a stage, how are there podiums, like that, are there lifts, something like that. And then the repair history, when were different types of repairs undertaken, what kind of repairs were undertaken. Then the observation of the structural audit people, whoever the agency, area-wise, external survey, what are the observations for walls, for lift and staircase, for skills, for terrace at different locations, location-wise observations with photographs, and distress maps, especially when it comes to RCC. The RCC work, when you got slabs, okay, for every floor there has to be a distress map wherein there is a plan wherein all the beams, columns are shown, and then pictorially the distress in the RCC member is shown and documented, so that it becomes very easy to refer to at the time of repair. So there are distress maps, photographs, videos if necessary. Then description of repair works to be undertaken. Okay, fine. If you want to enhance the life of this building, what kind of repair works are required? Or if the building seems to be, in a dangerous condition, What are your recommendations? What kind of repairs would be required? Minor repairs, major repairs are very simple words. What we are talking about here is exactly what is required to be done when we talk about repairs. And very importantly, final remarks and conclusion, two parts. One is whether the structure is habitable. If not, what kind of repair is required to be done and how urgent that is. That is what that report has to clearly bring out. Okay. Many times this report is formed, there is a particular pro forma B which is provided by MCGM in Mumbai, Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, for those of you who are from outside Mumbai. So there is a pro forma B. So such a report can be, should be made with reference to that. And then the critical remarks. Whether there is a need, looking at the condition of the building, is there a need for vacating flats? Need for evacuation? Is there an immediate need when the building is, is the slab sagging? Is there a need for propping up, putting those props? Any safety measures are required. This has to be clearly brought out because we are talking about the human safety here. Then, as I said, pro forma B is to be used, and then the building. The structural auditor has to classify your building as building C1, C2A, C2B, or C3. What it really means, we will see it in the next slide. And if necessary, the non-destructive test and repair estimates is to be undertaken. Now let's look at the classification of the building. C1 is the most, I would say, the unsafe building. People, it's something people have nightmares about. हमारा building C1 declare हो गया means as if it's the end of the world, and it sure is so far as the building is concerned. So C1 actually means an unsafe building where you can't stay in that building. You need to vacate and demolish the building. So I really pray that you people don't get some kind of a remark which is say C1. Then if C1 is to be demolished, C2 is a building which is not to be demolished but to be repaired. Okay, C2 is about needing major structural repairs. Now the structural repairs in this C2 category also there are two subcategories. C2A, yes, major structural repairs, but for that you have to vacate partially dangerous. If the building, a part of that building may be dangerous, so you vacate those people. Rest of the people may stay, and you carry out the major structural repairs. Okay, you don't demolish the building. Okay. So that is C2A. And C2B is a type wherein you don't vacate anybody, okay, but you do the major structural repairs when the people are staying there itself, but you still do major structural repairs. Coming to C3, it's a building, no evacuation is required, only minor repairs. And I would say, if you are very, very lucky, then somebody will tell you nothing requires to be done. Your building is absolutely in pink of health, and that's what. Congratulations. So that could be the final remark for which nothing needs to be done. So we have these four categories here: C1, C2A, C2B, and C3. Now, sometimes we have to carry out a non-destructive test in a building. So I'll just explain. This is actually I would say a technical part. So I don't want to really spend much time here. But still, for those people about who sometimes wonder कि ये चीज क्या है भाई, ये NDT क्या होता है? So one of the tests, that is ultrasonic pulse velocity test. I won't go into the details of how it is done and all. But what is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to find out how homogeneous and dense your concrete is, whether it's a column beam or whatever. Homogeneous and dense, nothing to do with strength. What is done? A sound wave is passed through that, okay, and depending on the velocity of the wave, there are guidelines. So this is about ultrasonic pulse velocity test. Then there is a rebound hammer test, which measures the surface hardness of concrete. There's a hammer, okay, which is applied on concrete, this thing, and then it measures the surface hardness of concrete. Now there are some disadvantages of rebound hammer tests which when they are done in old buildings, but that's a technical matter, I will not talk about that. Now, surface hardness, especially in new concrete, can be to some extent uh, I would say connected to the strength of the concrete, especially in new building. I'm not too sure about old building, but rebound hammer test can be the results can be to some extent used to understand the I would say the quality of concrete, the strength of concrete. Then there is the third test called half cell potential test, which tells you about the probability of corrosion in the cilia, in the rebars. Okay, wherever they are, they could be in column beam, mostly done in slabs. Then there is a carbonation test. As I said, carbonation is what happens to your concrete when the carbon dioxide reacts to that and then the concrete becomes brittle. And carbonation, depth of carbonation is something which carbonation test tells you. And if the carbonation happens right up to the cilia portion, then the cilia also starts getting corroded. The rebars also start getting corroded. So in that sense, carbonation test tell you two things: the loss of concrete, I would say loss of strength because of this carbonation, which makes it brittle, and the how close you are to starting the corrosion there. Then there's a core test. Core test means you remove a part of a concrete from your column or beam. Okay, you actually physically remove that. In that sense, it is not a strictly a non-destructive testing, but then you remove that and you fill in another material into that which fills in that area of superior strength. But you remove that and you test it in the concrete, and then this is a test which gives you an idea about the compressive strength of concrete. Then there are chemical tests, chemical analysis to understand chlorides. Chlorides cause corrosion of rebars. Sulfate test which causes deterioration of concrete, and pH which establishes the alkalinity of the technical terms. You only look at them from the user's perspective, not from the engineering perspective. And then there's a cement aggregate ratio, very rarely done, but then MCGM always puts it in, that's why I've taken it in this slide, indicative of possibly what kind of concrete mix was used when the building was constructed. So now guidelines for declaring building as unsafe. Now I would like to sort of assure you here that just because your structural auditor says the building is C1, it doesn't become C1. If the building is going to be demolished, and if it's going to be termed as C1 and then to be demolished, then there's an elaborate procedure. You can suddenly say, "Ye building ko gira do." So what is that procedure? These guidelines have come in the month of May in 2018. Now they are applicable to private and MCGM old buildings. MCGM is Corporation, Mumbai Corporation, and they are based on the guidelines issued by High Court in the writ petition of 1135 in 2014, and other guidelines circulated by Urban Development Department of Government of Maharashtra in November 2015. This is just a background for that. Now, what it says that if audit report is not submitted, notice may be served, that we talked about. If tenants and occupants object to owner's report, if the owner gets the structural audit done, and there are other people who, users, the real users, they don't agree to the owner's report. Or else, in case of a school, if the management gets a report from a structural consultant and it says the building is C1, but the parents of the students who are attending that school, they don't agree, then what happens in such case? They can appoint another structural auditor and submit his report. So in such case, if there is a conflict or if there is an objection, there can be two reports. Okay. Now what happens when there are two reports? Then if there's a conflict in the two reports, then the matter is referred to what is called as Technical Advisory Committee of MCGM, and its decision is binding, of course. Now when it is referred to TAC, TAC goes through an elaborate process. So I don't want to discuss that process here, but yes, there is a hearing and everything, site visits, everything, perhaps some more tests done and whatever it is required to be done, and then finally then the decision is given. Now, even after that, after going through all this procedure or this process, if the category C1 is confirmed, then the further process for demolition is is followed. Then the building is demolished.